Okay, Warriors and Traders here. I used, we're going to have to turn this, the term obscurity through clutter. And is that a fair assessment? Yeah, insofar as it goes, but it doesn't cover the whole game. I can't just use some trite little phrase like that, much as I'd love to. In fact, I think that's a complaint that applies to a lot of Euros and the like, which is that there's an attempt to make the game state difficult to assess. And to be fair, if you're playing a pure strategy game where there's no luck and no hidden information like this, what else is there? You know, except obscuring the game state, not being clear what paths are available between one player and the other. For example, in a game of chess, the whole game is about hiding your strategy behind what the game state appears to be. If the other player could see into your mind, he could see what's going on and perhaps counter it. In a game of Go between competent players, which I'm not, at least not at this level, the two players almost see into each other's mind and see what the trade-off that's being offered in each play is. But that's a level of competence I don't have. And if this game can reach that level, I think it's probably a very good game. I can't tell you if it can reach that level on my one little blundering play, right? I can tell you that this is not my kind of game. Obviously, it's terrible to play solitaire. Anything that's pure strategy, man, that's just not going to work very well. Even a multiplayer pure strategy is going to be very difficult to play in this kind of manner. Such games get whatever value they have, I think, out of making the game state difficult to see. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast. And so I don't think, given the popularity of a lot of Euro games that are kind of that nature, that that's a sufficient and adequate criticism to drive everyone away from it. But it should be enough that I should be able to hear that and say, you know what? You can't do it. You can't do the multiplayer pure strategy game that I'll enjoy. Something like Diplomacy sits kind of on the borderline because you've got a certain kind of luck in that you don't know what your opponent's plotting as his move. So Secret Pick ends up substituting for the idea of luck or whatever might be going into it. And when I play solitaire, I roll dice for my secret picks, right? Okay, so what about this game? Well, let's talk about components first. Beautiful components, actually. Counters, very nicely done. The problem, a couple of problems. One very minor one, they're side-mounted counters. That infuriates me. I end up trying to sand them off and damage the counters doing that. There's just no way to clip off side-mounted counters so that they look nice. I guess with a very, very careful scalpeling or a very sharp, tiny little scissors, you could remove those little tabs, but you can't do it quickly. But more importantly is, and part of that obscurity by clutter, they're hard to distinguish from one another. Victory point counters, commodity counters, it's hard to tell what's what. There's no real clear standing out. The board has the same kind of situation. Beautiful as hell. I'll show you the other side this time. This is the East Europe. Much more land-based. The other side is, of course, what we saw. Very, very pretty, but at times it may be difficult to see just what's where. The borderlines, though, are outlined, so I think it actually works pretty well. There's some hints on the board. For example, This green coloring means it's part of someone's home country. The green and orange together means it's a contested area. The little flames mean that. None of that's explained in the rules. You got to figure out what all those hints mean. And some of them are more than hints. Some of them are actual effects on the game. Nowhere does it tell you that you use these on the track. Maybe on the CD, who knows? But I expect rule books to be rule books, not to require you to open up a CD. However, with a little bit of thought and a little bit of ingenuity, you pretty much can come to an understanding of what the rules should be. The only exception perhaps being whether or not there should be a connection between the Orkneys and Scotland here that was left off on the board. I believe that probably is just a piece that's an error on the map. There should be a little boat printed there or something, like there are little boats here. And then there's the rules themselves, which are a muddled mess. Hard to access if you have questions. Vague. They don't handle certain things. So for example, with no map key or anything, this thing, you don't know whether or not these connect. I ruled that they did. You could go either way. You don't know what the intention is, though. In the case of the Orkneys, there's a serious balance issue if you don't connect that. That would be very, very hard for the Scots to get to if it's not connected. So there you have that. There are some issues with the components, but in general, they went for the artistic over the functional, and certainly the artistic over the correct. They didn't apply the level of quality control in terms of making sure that the game actually handles what it's supposed to. It actually covers all the rules and all the aspects that you need to play. That's disturbing. I wish I had the cards in front of me because they're what I'm more used to looking at this point. But the basic flow of the game, you pay out your upkeeps, you get resources from your things based on your fairly simple tech chart. Notably, you have to feed your troops before you get your resources in. That's kind of disturbing, but it can all be pre-planned in a way that you can't really easily pre-plan. You may not be able to pre-plan what your production is going to be because someone could take things from you. You could pre-plan troops that you're planning on losing on your turn and knowing what you have left to feed them. So the information's all available to you. It's just there's this long burden in a lot of the cases of the game of this kind of pre-planning type situation where you have to know exactly what your state is going to be on the next turn or in the next phase when you don't do the phases immediately one after the other, which is to say, for example, trading. Trading you do before anybody takes any of their actions, and then the actions are separated from one another. So you have to know what you're going to do in your two actions, or more if you have more, before you make your trade decision at all. You can't kind of, oh yeah, it's not like in Settlers of Catan where you can start to do something and say, let's do a trade, or do a trade with the bank. I find that disturbing. I would much rather, I would find the game much easier to approach if I could make that trade in the moment that I need it. Unfortunately for Settlers of Catan type situation, well, if you're trading with another player, that other player has to think real hard about what you're offering and whether it's worth it to them. They have some luck factor into that too, though, so they don't know for sure whether or not they're going to get what they're going to get. Here, you know for sure what you're going to get, so you can calculate everything out in advance, and I find that a headache. I would rather not have games where I have to think that many turns in advance. Part of that, you could say, is because I solo play with 6 powers, I can't keep track of what one's doing when if I make my mind up what I'm going to do, I may not remember it when I come back around to it. And that makes planning horrible. part of the obscurity fact through clutter is no victory point track. Hey, as soon as I started writing down the victory points, bang, oh, somebody's going to win. That annoys the hell out of me. And as soon as I saw that, I got excited about the game, though. Because at that point, the game started to have purpose. Before that, it didn't feel like I could get a grasp on anything that I had to kind of do. I didn't feel like, oh, here's what I need to do to move forward. It becomes clear after you've done it and screwed up that there are certain paths you can't take. That everybody has to pretty much take the path that says you get more production early in the game. And then the other paths you could fill out as needed when the game reaches a certain level at which, you know, you can feed a number of troops that you can operate with and such. Or quite possibly you don't need troops anymore because all the barbarians are wiped out, and then you can sort of concentrate more on castles and such now. Because you never have a lot of troops in this game. There aren't a lot in the counter mix, and you just won't have the food to feed them all. You also have to keep track on paper of war declarations and how long they've lasted, of trade routes that have been set up. There's no components in the game to facilitate remembering these things. And there's no sheets or anything to handle it. Not that they're terribly needed. But I find that disturbing in today's games, actually. It's not something I expect to see in a game that's made it in the modern era. Okay, let's jump back. Okay, then you go to this trade phase where you can trade your resources at a fixed value based on your trade technology, which can get very, very good. It can get up to 1-to-1, where all your goods are equivalent. And then nobody can trade if they don't reach that level. Yeah, well, you don't get up to the top of the chart very easily. That might be a goal, but you're not going to reach it there in most games for any of the charts. But you can get up to the level above it, I think, within many games. That's what it looked like to me. I think my game was truncated a little bit by the fact that, hey, I don't know that I'm like ready to win this turn until I counted the points for everyone. Trading with other players, I didn't see any of that. Why? Well, because if you end up setting up your economy so you're reliant on another player, then you're going to have to pay a higher price. So if you streamline your economy to produce one thing, well, someone who takes a more balanced approach can demand more from you. If a couple people streamlined their economies, that might work nicely, but the problem is there's only one thing that's easy to streamline, and that's the production, the produce itself, the logs, whatever you want to call them. Food and weapons are very rare, which means that there's this natural scarcity in two of the production lines. It's not a matter of if you focus really hard, you can produce more of them. You end up producing more of everything, and you end up with tons and tons of produce as of logs as well as food and weapons. If you can focus on food or weapons, so you end up not really needing anything if you focus on making either food or weapons as your primary choice. And therefore, anybody who has a lot of produce probably isn't very interesting as a trading partner to you. You might be able to say, okay, well, you're able to get 6-to-1 from the bank. I'll give you 5-for-1. That's not something that they can make, I think, as part of their standard procurement for every turn. It might work out where a few times that you make trades with someone else based on that, but it doesn't seem like something to direct your economy towards. The development phase. Most of the development phase's actions have to do with building up your military. Each of those actions forts, armies, and upgrading armies. Each of those actions takes a huge cost. You probably want to do those, though. You probably want to prioritize those to whatever extent you can afford them in terms of food, or with forts. You just want to build them because they're worth a lot. Especially early in the game, and the game may not last past early in the game, as we saw, because basically once all the barbarians were gone, the game was over, at least in the 6-player game. I suspect perhaps you're left with more of a choice in a smaller number of players in terms of whether you want to keep hacking barbarians, which is all you can do early on, or if when barbarians start becoming more expensive, you want to concentrate more on other types of ways of getting points. Building castles or forts is a really good way to get points. They're worth 3 points each and largely don't cost you that much. It looks like a huge cost. It's like 12 production, right? Well, 12 produce is nothing. The expensive thing is the 1 coin and the 2 food, especially, because food, if you have any armies on the board, gets eaten up. The coins, once you can acquire them, aren't too bad. Of course, you can use big chunks of produce to create those too, which is what people ended up having to do because we hadn't gotten far enough to get coins yet off the tech chart. And food is really a limited commodity. If you have a couple of armies on the board, that's probably all you can feed unless you have multiple food sources. So though you have a limit to how many military unit actions you can kind of take in terms of building your military units, which means, well, whatever other actions you have are going to be tech actions, which are free, except for they cost actions. But they don't cost you any resources, which is very cool because it helps you advance the tech chart. If they weren't free, if they cost you something, you probably would never take them. As it is, you don't take very many of them. And then you go to a very deterministic combat sequence, which is interesting. It allows you to make for this pure strategy game. There's an asymmetry in the sense that one player is the first player on the turn always, one player is the last player always. Each of those and all the in-between positions have different relationships in terms of their power as to how they can project their military and how it actually works. And that seems very, very strange to be different in the way that it is. But it does give you that that deterministic type of play that's a pure strategy game. And it's kind of interesting to see that as a game. Unfortunately, what it means is the game stops being representative of anything. And in some ways, the game seems to try to be very representative in terms of you feeding your troops, in terms of the technologies and everything. It feels like it's trying to be representative, but then it throws this really strange situation with a fixed player order and different ability to react based on that. And I'm just checking to make sure that my power is hooked up. It's plugged in, but my camera doesn't always work, as you've seen me complaining throughout the thing. Your victory points come from a mishmash of things: controlling territory, killing stuff, owning forts, which is sort of like controlling territory, but a little different. And then being the top of the chart, being at the highest point on the chart out of any players. They come rather quickly, the points. My game ended halfway through the turn track. I wasn't expecting that. I think maybe if people had played a little bit more carefully, they could have probably pushed it to another turn later. Maybe if there hadn't been such an imbalance in the powers, maybe that's another turn. And then we get to something a little bit more reasonable, like the game ending on turn 7 or 8 instead of ending on turn 5. But still, you'd kind of feel like a well-balanced game should take you all 10 turns. If players know what they're doing, and I don't think that's going to be the case. However, as I mentioned, there's room in the game to expand the victory point totals, and if you want also to expand the turn track, so that you can force the game to go a little longer. I see no real reason why you can't do that. In fact, a higher victory point total makes the game more competitive oriented. What we had was basically everybody feathering their own nest throughout the game. We didn't have war until someone's about to win. The problem, though, is you may be able to get more points without going to war. It's an expensive action to purchase, to blow an action on declaring war. And it's only going to last you 3 turns maximum. So, I don't know. It's certainly not my kind of game. I could see playing it in a social setting where I didn't give a shit too much how much I'm trying to win, and taking some enjoyment out of the social activity of being around people playing a game. But it's not the kind of game that really lends itself to that. It's very much this pure strategy, focus on winning, try to defeat one another by hiding what your intentions are. Not in terms of, oh, I'm going to screw this guy over, but in terms of it's not absolutely clear what my path to victory is from your point of view, right? I'm not necessarily trying to beat you directly, although that could come in terms of collecting points for battles and whatnot, capturing your territories. What I'm trying to do is accumulate victory points more rapidly, but in a completely open fashion. Everything's out there for you to see. There's nothing that's going to shake up the game except for maybe where you start at the beginning of the game and what kind of seat you're sitting in terms of the order of play. Some people may be better in one position or another, just because of their own nature or the type of strategy that they take. Clearly, being the guy who moves first probably is the best thing for combat, because you could strike first and wipe out the other guy's forces. We saw that with Burgundy being able to knock out the Swiss. The Swiss set themselves up, declared war, and then they had their army destroyed before they could do anything. But there's, I think, a lot of room for little strangenesses because of the turn ordering when it comes to the military phase. For people who enjoy a game where figuring out what the hell the game state is and trying to figure out a strategy to generate points that nobody else is going to see what you're doing, even though it's all out in the open. This might be pretty good. It really might be. I can't tell you. I don't see any glaring flaw in it from that point of view, though. It feels to me like, and granted, I was blundering around, but it feels to me like it's pretty solid underneath it. If you strip away the fact that, the rules are poorly written, that the components are hard, and in fact, maybe that's part of the design. The components are hard to read, so it's hard to see what the game state is. It's that obscurity through clutter ideal. This takes it to an extreme. That's all the game really has, is I can't see what you're doing because I can't see how many victory points you have without going over and counting your little pieces. Of course, it all becomes clear when you have this. I can't see necessarily what your options are because of the clutter of the sequence of play makes it difficult to figure out what your opportunities are going to be. Everything's interleaved in such a way that you can't really tell what your opportunity is. You don't have this, okay, I make this move, now you get a defensive move against that. It's not a chess-like game in that sense. It's a game where everything's in a tangled mess, and being able to see that mess better is what is going to be your competitive advantage. And I've seen people who are like really thrilled in a game when they can pull off that move that nobody thought they could do, even though it was right out in the open. That particularly is pleasing to some people, and this is certainly built for that type of player. Whether or not it succeeds in providing, a competitive game for a table of people who all know and can handle it at the same time, I don't know. Because I don't think I've ever played in a group that everyone was really competent at something like this. Almost always one or two people are good at the game, they get it. And sometimes it's me, sometimes it's not. And they kind of run away with the game for a while. And then other people start catching up and learning the curve and learning some things. And maybe the guys who were ahead are able to manage an edge, or maybe it just then kind of becomes kind of blah because everybody's kind of figured the game out, right? This will have the ability, though, to provide you with negotiation and deal making, which is of some value. Some ability to knock people down, although it's at an expense, a high expense. It's not like most games where you can just, he's in the lead, let's attack him. Nah, you gotta spend an action to prepare yourself to attack someone, and then you only get a limited set of attacks. I like those things, actually. I think there's some really interesting design elements in here. I just don't feel that it's my type of game when it comes out in the essence. And I'd be curious to see how well it holds up among the people who've played it. Now, it's been around for a couple of years, but it would be interesting to see how many people play it maybe 10 times a year regularly still, In the Euro crowd, in any crowd, except for ones that, really focus in on a game, things like Tigris and Euphrates, for example. There are still people who really, really play that. It would be interesting to see if this is a game that's gotten that kind of following. You read the comments on Board Game Geek, and it's hard to tell. Some people are like, I love this game because of this. Yeah, but it's not clear, you look at the comment and it was written about when the game came out, and you're saying, well, what do you think now? That would be neat to know. So many games get rated highly early on and then put on the shelf and forgotten about. And they've never received the trial by fire. Now, it's not like I put it through one. I know enough about this, though, to know it really isn't my kind of game. But I do see hints of something, and I do see enough signs of something that I think that maybe it could be a very, very good game underneath there for a certain type of player. And that is intriguing in its own way. And I'd like to hear from people who think it is. All right, up it goes.